we have Rebecca Diaz-Bonilla. She's been an international communications consultant for 19 years. She works with lawyers, executives, politicians, and others to improve their public speaking skills, create communication strategies, and help deliver crisis communications. She and her husband, Mariano, have 10 children. I think he's off the hook. Is he not here? Did he not? Oh, okay, he's at soccer, yeah, so he's otherwise engaged. And we look forward to hearing Rebecca's thoughts. Thank you so much.
Okay, hello. I love that Daryl put me right after the food. So hopefully everyone has found some handouts that I just passed out. I think I misled everyone. There's probably 20 on a table here and 2 over here. So to the extent you need to shuffle so everyone has them, so make sure you have them as we kick off. We also had a slight tech challenge this morning. So my dear friend Jose did not know that he would be helping me, but we're gonna, it's a little clunkier than we thought, and the sound system for clips that I'm playing is only out of that, as they told me, it was a subwoofer, and that means they'll be blown out with sound, and you guys might have a little bit of a hard time. I've been asked if I can give these slides, and the answer is no, because there's a lot of copywritten material up here, so I can't give you the slides, but hopefully, I think Daryl has some sort of YouTube channel rolling for this. So we'll be, oh yeah, John Beatty's on it right now. Okay, well, this topic, I think, needs about 4 days of a parent retreat to actually properly do it. But since we have a little over an hour, we're gonna roll up our sleeves and hopefully come up with some solutions after Mary's brilliant and terrifying talk. We're gonna dive in and see, well, what can we do in our homes to worry about this? So I've made massive cuts to this talk in order to fit it into the time scale. I'm going to cover the who, what, where, why, how of the moral imagination and specifically poetics. But I just want you to know that I've cut most of the philosophy out, which just about broke my husband's heart. So for those of you who are seeking the deep Aristotle philosophy, I'm going to touch on it, but it's not going to go very deep so that we can actually get to your worksheets on the table and talk about some of these things. So let me give a caveat to start. I love technology. I drove 2 of your babysitters up this morning, my daughters, and we were rocking to Marvin Gaye and of course, Morgan Wallen. And then who doesn't want to walk into a room of 85 kids after listening to Beyonce's Love on Top? You have to get there. So I'm telling you, I love it. I think I have 7 devices just for me. So I'm a lover of technology. I actually think it has allowed us to be better professionals, to be better parents. And if we learn how to use it, it's an amazing tool. It allows us to scale and outsource and do all the cool things that good companies do. And so I love technology. I want to start, I'll say this is our first moment of truth right here. I want to make sure also that you know I reject Javerian approaches. And this is our first poetic talk. If you are not familiar with Javert from Les Mis, you should be. I reject those approaches. So even though today I'm going to give you a lot of rules of the road, a lot of ideas, you've got to take what works for your family and ditch the rest. So I'll try to give you some guardrails that I've used and also some that we've made mistakes and let happen, and then we've had to redo the rule. I want us to know also that we've come a long way with what we're going to see today. I wanted to start with 1973 Schoolhouse Rock. So Jose, give this a little play. Okay, excellent. So you get the idea. That's Mr. Morton. I'm sure we're all familiar with it. Love it. One of the best educational songs out there. But this today would be considered a very low production quality in terms of animation. Now, what you saw in the animation was actually a lot to be left to the imagination, which is really cool. So if your kid were to watch this, they would then have to work and fill in the lines and the story and have to understand, well, what else is behind there? Because the artist didn't draw it for us. And so it's actually something quite good. 2 weeks ago, I tried Apple's new virtual reality. Has anyone tried this? So it was incredibly dramatic for me. you put on these goggles, and I was walking with dinosaurs. And it terrified me because I thought to myself, we're already at a point in our society where people choose artificial realities, and here comes Apple, who I love, and we've got something that is accessible to everyone, and people will reject the natural beauty around us in order to sink into these virtual realities. So you can see from this low resolution piece that imagination is key, leaving things open to the imagination. And while the super music is awesome, it's helpful that it's hard work to look at that and have to work through it. So I don't know whether you like roadmaps, but I'm going to give it because we're here together for a while. I'm going to first define moral imagination and the poetics, and then I'm going to share my view on the current landscape out there. We'll then pick up our worksheets and we'll start to break down the analysis. And we're going to go through just a few poetics. We're going to go through movies and we're going to go through music, video games, social media. And hopefully we'll get a sense for how you can approach this in a more detailed way. So, the who and what, defining moral imagination and poetics. So I think we can all agree, if you're here, that you want your children to make great moral decisions. And we have to expose them to good experiences in order to do that. And that is going to form their ability to make good decisions. So this is how we know. You can see the external senses, very familiar to us. We take in information through the external senses, and then our internal senses, the central sense, the intellect, the memory, and the imagination, sort all this out and decide, divide, combine what we see and hear and taste and smell and touch. And that's how our minds work. Well, imagination allows you to combine and divide the sense experience through your intellect. So that's imagination, but you can imagine a subset of imagination would be moral imagination. And that has to do with the ability to make good moral decisions. So if I say to you right now, Golden Mountain, in your mind, you've just imagined, hopefully, a golden mountain, but that has no moral content to it. But if I say robbing a casino, well, now you're imagining George Clooney and Brad Pitt and Ocean's 11, and now we've got some cool factor going. So that addresses something that is moral, and that touch is decidedly different than the golden mountain. So this is a subset of imagination, which is the moral imagination. Now, if we think about what is a well-formed moral imagination, it's an imagination which is formed in such a way as to assist a man to make good decisions. This is what predictive AI is trying to create. We need more time to think about how, as parents, we form our full moral imagination of our children. Those are our example to them. This is the experience that you give them. But today we're going to focus on a further subset, which is poetics. So, poetics. St. Thomas and Aristotle both put it that poetics you can think about are the entertainment and media inputs that we absorb through books and theater and music and news and sports and all those things that we watch and hear. Those are poetics. And we need to form our moral imagination through good quality poetics because those are all of the inputs that we take in. And today in the digital age, we are bombarded by these images and sounds. So we have to figure out how to use them and manage them. We have to give our children a good, steady diet of good poetics if we want them to make good decisions later, because they're going to be drawing on those inputs. The data mining that's happening is built by what we put into their minds. So the moral imagination is how our minds draw on that database of poetics to make good moral choices. Socrates in the Republic talks about how we need to keep bad poetics out of the city, which is, of course, a metaphor for the soul. And when Daryl asked me to give this talk again, I actually went and polled my older kids because they've now been through the Diaz-Bonilla factory, and they've been wading through decades of these live poetics, such as musical concerts and stand-up comedy. My oldest son said, "Mom, the character you develop in life is built by the stories and experiences you absorb." The character you develop in life is built by the stories and experiences you absorb. Well, the most fundamental and original poetic is storytelling. And it's an essential form of poetics. And one of my favorite poetics, and my sister's who's here today, was storytelling. We were Irish, and so after dinner, we would be forced to sit with our grandparents for hours, and they would tell these Irish tales, and every year they got bigger and bigger and grander, which is what the Irish tend to do. And that storytelling became a poetic in our life, and it helped to form the moral imagination that we now have. In fact, my New Yorker Irish father, who was in Vietnam, rarely talked about the war, but he would tell stories, little G-rated vignettes at these dinner tables that gave us a sense of how he could at least approach something as terrifying as a war. He gave us a great story that he would tell over and over and has now told my children that in 1969, apparently the Coke cans had ridges at the top and bottom of the can. And he would say that he would lead his platoon out of the jungle, and they would go and they would be at a command center, and they would be brought a block of ice and Coke cans. And they would take these Coke cans, and you were supposed to set the cans on the ice and let it melt, let it cool the Coca-Cola inside. But that's not what his men did. They would get their Coke can, they would flip it horizontally, and they would spin a Coke and spin it on the ice. And of course, the Coke got cold much faster, right? But when they opened the Coca-Cola, it sprayed out. And my father tells me yesterday, you know what? I knew at that moment we would lose that war. And he talked about the inability of those men he was leading to suffer and to be patient and to have self-control. And those are the stories that we grew up around the dinner table. So the storytelling as a poetic. I find it problematic that most of our kids know more about Kim Kardashian and Kanye West than they do about our ancestors. So I think that's one takeaway first and foremost, is that we have a duty to storytell about our family and our ancestors and tell our children, this is where you're from and this is who you are. So storytelling. All the poetics that we take in will help form the moral imagination, but we want to think first about what are the long-term effects if we have a deformed moral imagination. Well, one of them is the inability to communicate good moral actions in a pleasing way to others. An example of this is if you have a miserable teacher. And that miserable teacher, perhaps he's a crank or she's an Eeyore, and they're telling your kid a great lesson, but they're so miserable in the delivery that your kid casts away both the good moral lesson and the teacher. They write them both off. So the inability to communicate good moral actions in a pleasing way. We want our kids to react well to all of life, even the setbacks. We want them to come home and not make the soccer team, not make the play part that they want. And it's often our reaction to their setbacks that sets the stage for how they're going to react themselves in their life. I'll say, take two.
Guess what I am for the nativity? I'm a classic one.
Classic role, is it? Classic part?
Yeah.
Joseph?
No.
One of the three wise men?
No.
But it's a classic part?
Yeah.
Okay, you tell me then.
I'm door holder number 3 of the Golden Doors.
That's amazing! Golden doors for who?
Probably Joseph and Mary.
Oh my gosh, were you pleased when they said that?
And I was like, I'm a door holder. Get in there, let's go.
So another aftershock of a badly formed moral imagination is the associated false statements with vicious actions, or the association of unpleasant feelings with true statements or virtuous actions. Let me unpack that. So you can imagine a kid, that is fed, for example, on their social media, images of police abuse. They will associate police officers with badness and a bad feeling, even though police officers are not all bad. And contrarily, if your child is being fed good images like this one, so you can imagine the kid who's shown this reel, a different reel, is actually going to feel something different. They'll think of police officers positively all the time. even though the police officer in front of them may not actually treat them fairly. So they need to be able to associate goodness with good things and badness with bad things. This is why I won't allow my children to watch Encanto. I won't let it be played in my house. And it's because goodness is not presented as good. And I will just tell you that this is probably the first example of something that you go, wow, Disney's Encanto, why wouldn't she do that? I'm probably going to upset a lot of you in this talk to tell you things that we don't allow at all in our house. They're on the banned list. And this is a good example of one of them. And if you look through it, what you see is mockery of religion. My children are obviously half Argentine. It mocks the Hispanic culture. There are things in it that I just say, no go. It's on the no-fly list. So a well-formed moral imagination helps us also recognize the likenesses in stories that we digested through time and in our life. This is why a young lady who reads great novels recognizes Mr. Wickham when he comes around, and why your young son who's searching for his first friend can think of Sam from Lord of the Rings as a model. We can also not recognize things and then suddenly recognize them. I never understood Dante's Inferno. How in the world is treason the ninth circle of hell? You've got rape, you've got murder, you've got all these things above it, but treason? And then when you're betrayed by a dear friend, you get it. And it makes sense that it's the ninth. And those likenesses we pick up through our lifetime, and we see recall in our head. Our imagination draws on that and brings it back to present time. I found the best way to build moral imagination in my kids is to sing to them and to read to them. And I have friends who've done that with me throughout young children's lifetime. Table readings was a big thing in our social group. So our friends did lots of table readings. And you can imagine this varies from 15 to 30 minutes a day of you reading to your child. Or if you're not home, ask your parents to record themselves reading. I have a dear friend that did this with me when our children were quite young, and we faithfully read to our children every day. And this friend's son, when he grew up, actually ran into some hard times: drugs, pornography, crime, and they lost touch. And recently she told me that the son called her furious, yelling at her, saying, "Mom, I cannot get away from the sound of your voice, and none of it is fun." Well, if I can't think of any better Irish guilt than that, I don't know what is. So read to your kids. A well-built moral imagination built on the right imprints lead us to make good moral judgments. This is the mom who knows in her gut that the new boyfriend is a train wreck. Or the well-formed boy who sees a pornographic image for the first time and flinches and covers his eyes because he's been formed well to respect women. Aristotle taught us that you take in through your senses what are called impressions. These are imprints into your soul, something you cannot easily wipe away. And all those poetics will be what your internal senses draw on to make moral decisions throughout your life. And given the times that we live in, it has never been more important. The forces against us are immense and constantly changing tactics to desensitize and addict us. Algorithms built for addiction. Shadow banning, deep fakes, propaganda campaigns, scan and ban techniques, behavioral nudging, dopamine hooks just by getting a like or a text. And I'm addicted. We're all addicted. They've succeeded. And it's not an accident. It dulls the senses even further. This is why it's not surprising that most of the school shooters in the U.S. played Call of Duty and other violent video games, and they were desensitized. I read recently that in World War II, only 30% of the guns were discharged at humans. The soldiers didn't want to kill another person. Or why our girls who idolize and watch Taylor Swift skimping around the stage fight with us about wearing tragic prom dresses. This is what happens. It's desensitization that's happening to all of us. This is why a teenage boy who eats a steady diet of pornography struggles to treat women with dignity. First and foremost, his mother. And why a man, though, who can listen to inspirational and good quality music, like Chris Stapleton, for example, instead of violent and crass lyrics, can more easily comport himself like a gentleman and a professional. Moral imagination. So, as a recap, it's how we draw on the data center of poetics and experiences to make moral decisions. And those poetics are the inputs that we give and show and express to our kids. And that creates, hopefully, good moral outputs. Okay, that's the who and what. Now let's dive into the where, when, and why. In my work professionally, I deal a lot with risk analysis. And what I've learned is everyone has to take risks, and it is done through trade-offs. You just have to make decisions. You're going to get this, but you can't get that. The trade-offs are important. Well, I used to think that these poetics in this digital age, I used to think, sort of in a Benedictine sort of way, that we could shut it out, that we didn't have to deal with it. Well, I'm converted. I think this is a bullet we have to take on. We cannot dodge it. We are so deeply in a digital age, and our children have to learn how to deal with it. It's imperative that we face this problem and train our families to optimize the good, avoid the bad poetics that surround us, and in most cases, invade us. We're living through turbulent times. A storm I could not have imagined, but as we all read, Ray Bradbury did in 451, and he predicted this digital world with screens everywhere and no more books. Take a ride on an airplane. Everyone's plugged in like robots. So if you're brave enough to follow the news these days, it's depressing. There are extreme sufferings happening around the world. I recently read an article about African refugees who paid for what they thought was safe passage to Europe, but it turns out they paid traffickers. And they were taking them to a Libyan slave center. But the boat was overtaken by a storm. And the traffickers thought, easy solution, we'll just start throwing the refugees off the boat. And they did. And they drowned. And they paid for it. And we can sit in this beautiful room and think, well, those sorts of sufferings are far, far away from us. But actually, I find the sufferings we're enduring much more insidious and sneaky. They're invading us, and we're paying for it. They're trafficking our minds, and we're paying for it. We're allowing them to do it. There are dehumanizations taking place in the sneakiest of ways: loneliness, despair, suicide. We're drowning in digital pollution. We're bombarded with images and sounds. We are not made for the speed and the dose and the duration that we're enduring. It's deforming us, whether we realize it or not. And we're not only drowning in digital pollution, we're in a full-on war. We're under attack. Our spouses are under attack. Our children are under attack. Our families and our country. Countries and companies are scraping the internet for our pixels and private information, and most of us allow them to invade us. Hackers are everywhere. Kids are targeted. Exploitation is happening to us from every poetic imaginable. A good example of that is from my own life. I went on my Instagram feed and saw this lovely clip from Aaron Mickey, who my kids told me was a basketball player and coach. And the reason it came up on my feed is because one of my sons follows it. And then it was fed to me because they're tracking us. And it was awesome. Go ahead, Holz.
My grandfather walked 10 miles to work every day. My father walked 5. I'm driving a Cadillac. My son is in a Mercedes. He said my grandson will be in a Ferrari. But he said my great-grandson will be walking again. So I asked him, I said, well, why is that? And he said to me, tough times create strong men. Strong men create easy times. Easy times create weak men. Weak men create tough times. He said to me, many will not understand, but you have to raise warriors.
Well, lucky for me, I married a warrior. And we set out 25 years ago to raise warriors. And while we keep messing up, we have not given up. And looking back, I can tell you we did some things right. One of the things I refrained to my very young children, if they ever complained or whined or wilted at the least challenge, was, there are no wimps in heaven. And there are no wimps in heaven became one of our family mantras. I guess I had unknowingly fed my own moral imagination with certain things that allowed me to recognize the storms coming. And it drew Mariano and me to focus harder on prudence and fortitude in our children, and thanks be to God for that. It's why my personal favorite of the C.S. Lewis Chronicles is A Horse and Its Boy, where scenes of good attitude and endurance and warrior-like behavior is described with such vividness and with such hope that I think my kids will draw on it in hard times. Scenes like when Shasta and Erebus and their two horses, Win and Bree, are racing to warn Keen Loon about the invading army, galloping hard. Quote, "Certainly both horses were doing all they could, or at least all they thought they could, which is not the same thing. And Aslan the lion appears to scare them into riding harder and faster than they thought they could muster. Well, I think we could all use a little bit of Aslan right now. I think a healthy dose of fear for us as parents gets us to run a little harder and a little faster and get the hard work done of raising our kids well in this digital age. And we need to help our kids deal with this age with good cheer. Just like King Loon described the duties of being a king to his newly found heir, quote, "This is what it means to be king, to be first in every desperate attack and last in every desperate retreat. And when there's hunger in the land, as must be now and then in bad years, for him to wear finer clothes and laugh louder over a scantier meal than any man in your land." Well, I've learned way more as a parent from the times that I've blown it, and I'm sure you have too. Mariano and I continue to reset ourselves so our children can actually become warriors. And we're facing those hard times now. We're going through, my husband and I like to say, an apostasy of first principles. And I think this digital bombardment is one of the challenges of our time. Yes, there are other challenges, there are other ages and other nations, but we as an America, we have a particular role to solve this. We created the mess. We export this. We have to lead on the responsible management of these poetics. These smartphones are powerful tools, and these things will be a part of our children's lives. So we have to teach them how to operate them, moderate them, mine the good out of them, and most importantly, learn how to not use it. So even though I am a recovering lawyer, I can't shake off the temptation to give a Dave Letterman top 10 rules of the road that we have followed just as we start going into this. First, if we don't practice what we preach, we might as well pack it up and compete for worst parent of the year. We have to model the behavior that we demand of our children. We have to make it a team effort. That it's the Diaz-Bonilla family that does this together, not the kids. And we have to establish reasonable rules that everyone will follow. I remember from my childhood, my parents had a 30-minute of TV or screens a week, and we loved it. To avoid sleepovers, we had 8 o'clock Saturday chores, which made it very difficult and tricky to have any sleepovers. It was an excellent system where we weren't allowed to watch anything that the youngest kid in the house was not able to watch. And it created a sense that we didn't need this stuff. Well, it's harder today. And we, in our family, we constantly discuss poetics with our kids. Constantly. We see an ad on TV, we talk about it. We see a movie, we listen to something, we talk about it. My kids play this lyric game with music that they listen to a song and they try to make it good. And if they can't, they decide as a group, we just can't listen to that one. So it's important that this is all in together. If you haven't left a movie theater with your kids because something inappropriate came up, you are missing something cool. Walking out together and being a rebel with a cause is so exhilarating, and it's bonding. And you should do it when that next movie comes out that everyone has to see. Don't go see it. Yes. Preach it. Love it. Second, you do not have to pay for anything that will corrupt your kids. Be willing to take away anything that stands as an impediment to their salvation. Number 3, do not let your kids willingly be slaves to this stuff. I was so heartened by 2 of my kids as I told them I had to give this talk. They told me that the 2 of them had read an article that these companies have figured out the color scheme in your smartphone to best addict you. So what did these 2 of my kids say? They turn off their color. And apparently it's a cool trend. It's called grayscaling. So that you turn it off so they can't get to you quite as easily. And I was so proud. They will not be slaves to this. And there's something about human freedom that demands us to have that spirit in both us and our children. We have to be in it all together. 4, teach your kids manners. Now, I think any one of you who've sent your boys and girls to my house know that I will dress down a kid, no matter if it's mine or someone else, if they're in my house. And part of that is if I see a kid enter my house with earbuds in, off they go. You park your phone. Don't come to my house to hang out if you have a phone in your hand. Go sit in your bedroom. I don't need that. So we have to reclaim manners for our kids and help them to realize how to deal with these things. I think it was Oscar Wilde who said the first and last mark of a civilized society is manners. I remember being in London on the tube for work, and I remember I couldn't believe it. I passed all these guys. Luggage trying to make it to the city, no door was opened for me. All these guys passed. And I thought to myself, I have delivered 5 boys, and I am dead set that my girls and I will never open a door so long as we live. And so now I stand back and just sort of wait and make snarky comments about how chivalry is dead because I can't believe they don't open the doors for us. So we've got to reclaim that. Manners. 5, be fun. No one likes a prison warden. I know that my husband has invested a lot of time and money on a bobcat on my property because he wants to be the fun house. He wants to have kids want to come over and have experiences that are not on a screen. As my daughter told me recently, Mom, it's not about no's. It's about building a culture. You built a culture that has us understand the human person, which is true and beautiful and good. It's one of the reasons I never let my kids watch SpongeBob. I don't even know what it's about. But I saw the animation years ago and thought, that's so ugly. I don't want my kids to see it as young children. So whether or not the content is good, the beauty alone is something that we have to drive them towards. Number 6, trust your gut. We're about to walk through a very seemingly complicated structure that you see on your table in these workshops, and I don't want to scare anyone. You should trust your gut. You don't need this level of analysis to actually make good parenting decisions. Stick to your guns if it does not feel or sound right. The virtuous man that Aristotle described was someone who could think or feel their way to truth. So be brave and stick to your guns. One of my sons in college recently called and told us what he was up to, and he said his friends were pressuring him hard to see this new rated R movie that had just come out, and he said he didn't want to go, so he was home alone in the dorm that night. And I said, why didn't you want to go? And he said, I saw the trailer, I didn't like the way it made me feel. And I thought, amen, yes. Didn't like the way it made me feel. That's good enough. So we don't have to have these analysis systems and metrics down. Trust your gut. Number 7. You can change your mind, the rules, the course, anytime you please. Things happen in life that put us off course. My first kid said transubstantiation. My 8th one said press play. Life changes. Miscarriages, deaths, financial ruin. Hard times come. You've got to change how things operate in your house and be brave enough to do it anytime that you want. I reserve as a mom the ability to change my mind any moment. And so they know that if they come and press me on something, okay, fine, I say no now. So change your mind. 8, one size does not fit all families, and I have learned the hard way that one size does not fit all kids within the same family. Kids change. They're not robots. They're not shaped by operant conditioning. Every kid is born with disordered passions, and they're different. They're not weighted the same in each soul. They come with different temperaments and temptations. And so some shows or movies or books will be harder for some kids than others. And so we can't have a one-size-fits-all approach, which I'm guilty of doing for many years. And I know how harmful it can be. 9, we should be in the business as parents of increasing the odds of success for our kids. That's the goal. A successful child does not mean you're a good parent or a good person. And for that matter, an unsuccessful child does not mean that you're a bad parent. We must behave as if it all depends on us and then leave the rest up to God. Number 10, obedience, and probably the most important of these 10 rules of the road. As we turn to moderation techniques and examining the Poetics, if you don't have the ABCs of obedience down with your kids, you will fail. And as you heard me say above, the table readings are so important, and they were in our house. Well, one of my favorites was the Laurel Ingalls Wilder series. And you might remember the scene in Little House in the Big Woods where Pa's gone hunting, and Ma and the girls are left alone, and Ma and Lar go to the barn to milk the cow by themselves at night, and Ma sees a bear. And she whispers to Lara, "Go back to the house." And she does. And where they're both safely in the house, Ma says, quote, "You were a good girl, Lara, to do exactly as I told you, and to do it quickly without asking why." Which surprisingly is, ooh, did I skip it? Oh, you were there, Holes, thanks, sorry. Which is surprisingly the classical definition of obedience, a definition we had posted on a refrigerator when our kids were very young so that they could remember what the standard was. And this itself, this image, became a poetic for my children. Obedient people accept as their own instructions, which come from authority, provided they do not go against justice. They act promptly to comply, striving to faithfully interpret the will of the person in authority. And the analogy actually keeps getting better. Ma sees the bear, and Lara doesn't. And that's the way life is, isn't it? We see more than our kids do. That modern sitcom lie that the stupid parents don't know what they're doing, it's not true. We actually do see farther than they do. We see the dangers coming, and it's up to us to tell them all about it. It's precisely why when they're very, very young, 0 to 3, even though they try to ask why, you don't owe them an answer. I'm shocked at the parents in the parking lots of supermarkets who negotiate with their 2-year-old to get their car seat belt on. I don't get it. Those kids become annoying. And that's exhausting. And that's why when they start approaching the age of reason, 5, 6, 7, and they're desperate for answers and the reasons why, we're washed up. And this is the parent of a teenager who says, "Because I said so," when they deserve to be sat down and told exactly why until they're satisfied with the answer. This is one of the things my husband Mariano does so well. I fall in love with him every time because I lose patience right away. He doesn't. He sits night after night and tries to be up at 10, 11, 12, 1 a.m. when he knows they'll be milling around the house. And he's there for them. And he answers the hard whys. Even though the lectures go on way longer than the kids want, it works. And I get it. Negotiating with kids, talking to our kids, it's really hard. And actually, I heard a podcast before this talk preparation by Robert O'Brien, who was the U.S. hostage negotiator under President Trump, and he gave a great podcast about negotiating with terrorists, which I thought was very apropos for today. He said, be respectful, listen to actually understand what the other side wants, and so that you can explain what you want. Be honest. Doesn't mean you tell them everything, but you don't lie. And be willing to say no. Our primary job as a parent is not to be their friend right now. The only way that you're actually going to be friends with your kids later is if you raise them as a parent now to be people you actually want to be friends with. So we have to say no and be proud to do it. Now, we've gone through the where, why, and how. We can now move to our workshop sheet in front of you, and we're going to start with something I mentioned earlier, which is what I call the no-fly list. These are things which we don't allow in our house at all. I'm going to turn on this mic. I don't know where our sound guy is. Let's see if does this work too? Good. These are the no-fly lists. And as you can imagine, these are things, this is not what we're going to talk about today. I just wanted to be clear before we start. We're not talking about things that weaken the moral compass, like pornography or something. I'm assuming today we're all going to say that's not allowed. We're not going to even deal with that. We're talking about the trickier calls, about music and movies. So we need to make sure that we understand what those are. An immoral act which is not simulated. So this is a big deal in my house. We don't watch married or not, we don't watch people do anything intimate or physical. So when you see a scene in our house where 2 people are kissing, we close our eyes, particularly if they're not married. I think Kirk Cameron's the only one who's made an exception to that lately because he does movies with his wife now. But you can still imagine, it's not good. Imagine seeing scenes from people actually being murdered instead of a stage fight. You don't want to watch immoral acts that are simulated. We're not talking about music that unbridles the passions. We're going to talk a lot about how to analyze music and what to do with it, but I'm not talking about things that, make your kids want to go shoot up something. That's not what we're doing. Harassing advertisement, we don't watch ads in our house. I find them incredibly invading, and I think they're out to get us to buy stuff and manipulate us, so we don't do those. And there's no mistreatment of holy or sacred things. This would be like the Encanto example that I gave earlier. Is that annoying, the feedback? Yeah, it's annoying. Okay, I'll go back over here. So, testing the poetic. We'll do this again. Okay. Sorry. So, let's talk about testing the poetics. So this is a breakdown of how you could manage poetics in your own family. And what you want to have is just a sense of what we're looking at. So first of all, quantity. Do I have the time? Is this the best use of time? That's how much are we going to actually watch poetics. And it could be news. It could be things that you think, oh, this is healthy. But we're going to talk about what that is. Content. Is the virtue presented as a good and a vice presented as an evil? Quality. Is it well produced? Is it done in a way that's appealing? It's really acted well. So this is something that's not produced well would be like the Hallmark movies, Christmas Ranch or whatever, when everyone has the Dyson wrap hair. You know what I'm talking about. Those movies would be low quality, but maybe not morally bad, but they're low quality. Is it age appropriate? Are your kids ready for this? Am I ready for this? You have to make sure that appropriateness of age is there. Hamilton, you'll hear me talk about Hamilton tonight. Hamilton's an amazing genius musical from my vantage point. It's not for kids. There's a lot in it that just aren't ready. I have a 9-year-old, and I think the last time I gave this talk, I was pregnant with that child. And he's a boy, and he's at the heights. And I remember when the Top Gun movie came out recently, the newest one, which is PG-13, if I'm not mistaken, who, by the way, the Motion Picture Association, the board of it is Disney, Netflix. They're out to make money. That's their job. So if the floor is not the age recommendation of those who want you to go buy tickets, a 9-year-old should not be going to those sorts of movies. And actually, that's a section where you can use that as an excuse. No, you can't go. Even though all your friends are going, I don't care. You're not going. It's not age appropriate. And then is it personally offensive? So I, for example, am very sensitive to war movies. So if Mariano and I want to sit and watch a movie, he wants to watch a blow up something, I can't do it. He's more sensitive to romantic scenes. So you have to be attuned to who's personally offended by things. Okay. Quantity. So the average screen time, interestingly, in the U.S. has actually gone down precipitously in the last 10 years. This is a current snapshot of how much screen time in the U.S. You can see other areas of the world are darker blue, which interesting, again, we're exporting it. We're actually on the downslide of the damage. This is why you hear things like the Silicon Valley school systems don't have tech in them. It's because they realize it's poison. It's not good for them. They don't need it. So we're actually going down, but the average in America is 7 hours a day. And that doesn't break down what would be more for teenagers. I read somewhere that it's 12 hours a day for teenagers. I don't know how they do it because, as you can see, I just tried to, this is my own little pie graph. But what you could do with your kids, what we do with our kids, we sit and say, okay, let's talk about how much time you actually have to watch NFL tonight. Let's talk about this. So if you have sleep and you have school and you're eating and you have homework and extracurricular, hopefully they're grooming and taking showers. That's helpful. They've commuted there and back an hour, which is, I think, reasonable. I put a half-hour of prayer just for kicks. You can see there's no time. There's no time. So quantity is one of those huge things that I find it's an easy battle to win because you can prove to them there's no good use of that time once you map out what a natural day would be for an aged kid. We haven't even gotten to being with family and friends, by the way. All right, the content. So the goal of the poetic art is here. We have to make sure that it's good quality. And this is hard today. I want to make sure you guys understand. I mean, I meant it when I said we were rocking to Beyonce on the way up. This is really hard to find good content. So I get it, but we do have to seek this, and that good is presented as good and evil is evil. Quality. So Aristotle talked about how the worst poetics happen when evil is presented as a good or well-produced. This is like the Ocean's 11. What a great movie. But actually, it conditions us to think that robbing the casino is okay. And of course, they put great stars, and it's super cool, and Julia Roberts looks so good, and the whole thing is happening, and so we think, yeah, that's cool to rob a casino. That's because they produced it well, and you want to do it. And that's what would be an example of the worst. Whereas if it's produced poorly, that's not going to create as much damage because you're not attracted to that particular poetic. This is like bad music. If it's horrible music, you don't have to worry about it so much because your kids aren't going to be attracted to it. All right, is it age appropriate? I'm going to race through that because we get it. Is it personally offensive? Okay, we already did that. All right, so you have this in front of you. So what you're seeing here is, again, the worst thing. Poor Ocean's 11. I love that movie. You're going to see that's where vice is presented as a good and it's produced well. The next damaging is vice presented as a good, but it's done poorly. Virtue then as a good, but it's produced poorly. So I've heard some people say this is like bad Christian music. This is just a terrible idea of a genre. And virtue presented as good and done well, which is what you ultimately want. And you want to find these. And there's so many cool technologies out there. We have several. We have VidAngel, we have ClearPlay, we have a bunch of stuff that we can watch. Rudy, for example, a great movie where where's Daryl? His Notre Dame alma mater. And we can see this great inspirational flick, and you can cut out things that you don't want. So there's technologies out there allowing you to do that. All right, so let's apply this test. Let's get going. We're going to start with movies. It's important when you see these that most of my children have seen these, so don't stress out. Not all of them. So I've put up here examples of what I would say the most damaging: $1 Million Baby, Forrest Gump, James Bond movies. When you think about like treatment of women, stealing, killing, blah blah blah, those are things done well. They're fun to watch. Who doesn't love a Zootopia scene? SpongeBob, which I think is not good animation. That would be it's done poorly. Preteen movies, obviously. Hallmark movies, Much Ado About Nothing. This is, you've seen bad Shakespeare. It makes kids not like it when it's acted poorly. That's an example. And then I put movie examples that we think are just so good morally. And if for anyone who can't see it, Cinderella Man, Pride and Prejudice, The Incredibles. These are things that are both produced well, but also present good as good and evil as evil. Okay, so let's play a little bit of Ratatouille and see its why on the negative list.
We look out for our own kind, Penny. When all is said and done, we're all we've got. No. What?
No. Dad, I don't believe it. You're telling me that the future can only be more of this?
This is the way things are. You can't change nature.
Change is nature, Dad. The part that we can influence. And it starts when we decide.
Pixar went through a very organized campaign years ago that started this is one of the first films that is nature is change. You can change your nature. This is hearkening back to Mary's talk earlier. So that's an example of the worst that it could get. And here's an example of The Incredibles, which we annually watch because it's so fabulous. Jose, can you play this? Okay, so there we go. So we're going to watch this clip of Polar Express. This is your first moment. We're going to watch this, and then at your table, I'm going to give you literally a minute to talk about it and decide which one of these, it's a little fun multiple choice, which one of these you would put it as. And of course, there can be differences of opinion, but just to see our first stab at getting this. So, Jose, if you can play the clip, and then we'll have a discussion.
What would you buy for Christmas?
Me.
You.
Okay, you saw the production quality, so there's that. I'll skip to the line, but he says, eventually, he says, the magic of Christmas lies in our heart. That's the takeaway of that particular scene. All right, so you guys have a minute. Talk amongst yourselves. Okay, let's pull it together, and I will ask. Let's ask AJ Morton in the back. What did your table come up with? AJ, what did you guys have? Oh, here goes AJ. Big voice. It is creepy. It's creepy. All right, good. So there's your first dive, and we're going to now move to music. And music is multifaceted, and it's one of those things that I find really fun to unpack the poetic goodness or badness with your kids, because you also get to teach them about tonality and rhythm and all these things. I heard this fantastic interview by the writer of Hamilton, Lin-Manuel Miranda, where he said that when he was writing this over the course of 6 years, he figured out that rap was the music of war. And I think it's so true. And that's why in the musical, what I think is so brilliant about it is that you have these war scenes where it's full-on rap and it's intense and you hear the pounding. And then they flip to these scenes that are just these lovely ballads with nice tones and chords. And you feel that distance and difference from the battle scene, which I think is really done well. So I'm going to play a couple of this. This is a clip of the guns and ships scene from Hamilton. Okay, so that's a good example of war. Now let's play a little. This is just to set up the scene. This is near the end. It's quiet uptown. Hamilton and his wife have lost their child. And for any of us who've lost a child, you can hear this and you know they nail it. They nail the feeling. And so let's listen to this.
Just when
Okay, so that's a great example to me of something that's come out in our children's lifetime in the musical theater field that we have to help them understand because it's theirs. This is written in their lifetime, especially our teens and our 20-something children. They have to understand what this is and what's true and what's not true historically, but also how to interpret this music and when it's age appropriate or not. I'm watching some of this, and I think Disney carries Hamilton, for example, on TV, but I can't show all of it to my kids because there's scenes that are just wholly inappropriate. So understanding how to unpack it and working through it with them. Frozen is a great example where, we went to Frozen and, it's so cool and the music's amazing and you've got Idina Menzel singing and she's fabulous and high quality music. But if you listen to the words, it's funny how some distance can make everything seem small. The fears that once controlled me can't get to me at all. It's time to see what I can do to test the limits and break through. No right, no wrong, no rules for me. I'm free. Let it go, let it go. I'm one with the wind and sky. Let it go, let it go. You'll never see me cry. So it's interesting. So we really grappled this because I love a good voice. And so we thought, how can we do this? How can we listen to this? I don't want my kids to sing these lyrics. I don't want that embedded in their psyche. So how do we do it? And of course, we played the lyric game. So we changed the lyrics and we made it something they could sing, which was kind of fun. So one option is to not let them listen to it and use it. Another option is to talk with them about it and then figure out how you can renovate it and try to make something good out of it. So that's a good example of that. All right, let's test ourselves. I'm going to scoot through this before I'm cut off by Phil. Okay, so Toby Keith just died. Anyone who knows me know I love country music. I think it was Waylon Jennings who said it's 3 chords and the truth. It's so fabulous. You basically just have to stay away from booze in country music. So that's all that's there. This is Toby Keith. He just died, and this was his last performance. And what I find so interesting is when I've gone on retreats before, I've heard the priest of Opus Dei say, you got to kill the old man inside. So I thought it was really interesting that his last performance and one of his last songs created was this song. So we'll play a piece of it. Okay, so just to keep it moving, this is your next project. So at table, I'll give you about 30 seconds and think about what you would rate that Toby Keith song as using the Poetic sheet in front of you. Okay, great. I'm going to ask Dr. Sandy Kramers to stand up and give us her table's rendition. Dr. Kramers, please. What are your thoughts?
My husband was from the Netherlands, and he was very wonderful to raise our children to appreciate classical music from the very beginning. And we made a little bit of a mistake, but at the time it sounded like a good thing, to label all rock music as junk music. And so one of the positives that go along with your talk back then is that it really, classical music makes your moral
And you want them attracted to those. And it's hard sometimes given the competition that's out there. But I agree. I think that's part of the age appropriateness, when to expose at certain levels different kids to certain things. Okay, we're moving to video games. Anyone who's a friend of mine knows I have an allergy to them. And so I'm a bad person to be talking a lot about it because I find them so destructive. And it's one of the things that we managed to ban in our house. My mother sent us a Wii one year. And I now understand that every Christmas, the kids are lobbying to bring it out for a celebratory week of addiction. And then they put it away. And we just have said no to video games. I just always thought it was weird. And sure enough, the decades of damage that's out there is now in research, and we can see the harmful effects of it. I asked my teenage sons, actually, many of you who know them, my kids were not allowed to watch or play video games at our house. I know they go to a friend's house and they do it. But I asked them, what do you see? I mean, what do you see? He said, you can tell a Call of Duty kid and you can tell a Minecraft kid a mile away. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, the Call of Duty kids are more aggressive. Their language is a bit harsher. You can just tell that that's their steady diet. And the Minecraft kid, they said, are socially awkward. They're used to making their own worlds or whatever they do. They withdraw, that they're just not able to engage in a normal way like someone who hasn't had it. So I have really strong opinions. I had to call my older kids and help me with this one because I would have judged everything as just evil, awful. And they were like, come on, Mom, be cool. And so I tried to be cool, and I put Miss Pac-Man up. So this is a quick one. We won't spend any time on it, but Miss Pac-Man, I'll just give you the rating here. So the rating would be here. It's not considered high tech. The images are not very addictive. It's not produced well. So it's not highly, highly addictive, but it's morally neutral. So it would be the yellow plus sign here. All right. So I'll move off of that since I'm not a good speaker or proponent of it. I can't give a balanced view. Okay, books. So this is my jam. I'm a geek. I love books. I think that our kids, one of the things that we did with our kids is I just created enormous book lists. So when they asked to read something that I thought was garbage, I'm like, no problem, just finish the book list and then you can read it. And of course it took them until they were 22. And so we avoided all the garbage in that way. I've put up a few examples of things, and I know some people can't see, so I'll just say I think the most dangerous are the ones that are written in a very sexy, attractive way, like Hunger Games, Twilight, these sites of books, very alluring, very attractive. Beach reading, it's eye candy, it's fun. Those are dangerous. The Judy Blume books are garbage writing, but it's really dangerous content. Left Behind series, I don't know if anyone's ever read those, but they're, like trashy Christian apocalyptic novels. It's good morality, but really poorly written. And that's not good because it doesn't make our children attracted to that. And then there's such a treasure trove of awesome books out there. So for me, books are a real opportunity cost argument. If you want to give your kids Poetics, give them books because it forces them in the most egregious way to not get the bad stuff because it's labor. So if they want to do bad stuff, they'll make it easy and just go watch something. It's harder to make them addicted to that kind of stuff because it takes work. So I just thought it'd go so controversial and fun, just for drama. And I here's Harry Potter, and I'll give you, you definitely have to discuss this because this will be fun. You guys take a minute, and it actually doesn't matter which novel it is. You can do the analysis without it, but I think this is Goblets of Fire. So talk amongst yourselves. Okay, So let's call on the fairest redhead. Well, actually, it's probably a contest between Chambers, but I'm going to call on Katie Beatty, who's the other fire. Katie Beatty, talk to us. What do you think? What did your table say? Big, loud voice.
So we had actually all ends of the spectrum, both it went well and done well, and I said that this is what we discuss with children. We discussed how lying is not necessarily portrayed as a good in this book. So you can cover basically every single sign in Harry Potter. So if you have a hard stop and you do no, not at all. But if you have discussions with your children, then you can go.
Okay. Just so you know, my husband just took me to Nate Bargatze, who's hilarious. And he was making fun of all the wizards that are around these days. And so it was a great clip. But I will let this sit and let you guys talk about it afterwards. But this is a juicy one for sure. I want to end with social media, which I find to be one of the scariest things happening. As a rule, just so you know, our kids aren't allowed to have social media. Some of them have broken the code and snuck it. And of course, we've had to no phone for a year or whatever cruel thing we did. But we give it to them when they're a senior in high school, and it's our way of greenhousing them into responsible usage. I think it's worked. My older kids, I cannot get them on their phone. They don't like their phone, and they don't use it. So I think it's been successful in that way. And they're not phone addicts, which is great. But this is built. These companies are trying to design it to catch you in an addiction. And I will just throw out that it's tricky. 2004 is when Facebook came out. So we're talking about 20 years of this. And again, we have the research. We have ample data. New York City just declared social media a health emergency, if you didn't see that fun bit of news. And you can see why, because it's just so addictive. So this is the average across all ages in the U.S. We're at 2 hours a day just on social media. And so you can imagine for teens, I think it's 5 hours. It's something crazy high. And then for older generations, it's quite low. But this is the latest that I could find on the stats. I struggled with this one, but I did my best to put up examples. I've put TikTok as a national security issue, and if you haven't read enough about it, it just shouldn't be on anyone's phone, as far as I'm concerned. Snapchat, I mean, this is where drug dealers go to live and rule. So I actually had to follow Snapchat for a client about a couple months ago, and all of a sudden, all my kids' friends were Snapchatting me, and I was like, oh my gosh, they're all on the drug lord app. Instagram and Facebook. So I put those up because they're, sometimes morally okay, sometimes they're not. LinkedIn is not produced as jazzy. It's also not as fun as some of the other ones. So I put that there. I don't know what's good. I think that it is purposely deteriorating our attention span and addicting us to the images. And it's so fun. I mean, it's so easy. It's so much easier to go on a social media page than talk to your spouse. So it's fun. I get it. I thought we'd test it with this clip.
I missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost almost 300 games. 26 times I've been trusted to take the game-winning shot. And missed. I've failed over and over and over again in my life. And that is why I succeeded.
Okay, so quickly have a chat at your table, and then I'm going to wrap things up. Okay, let's get a Bendek. Nelson. Let's go, Nelson. Up you go. Tell us what you think. Table rep. I love it. Trust your gut.
No, yeah, I think it's presented really well. It's one of those big questions about failure. I think it can be used as a teaching video, as a tool, as a moment in life. I mean, I think it's a lot can come out of this video.
Yeah, the tricky thing about social media, yeah, it depends. Yeah. And it is Michael Jordan. So, there's that. What I would say is I think this actually adds a new heightened level of analysis with social media, which is the addictive quality of it. And then what's engineered to feed in is what's really at risk here, is the danger. And you can find really good content, but there's also really bad content. I'll just close before Daryl tackles me off the stage. I'll close by saying that I think for all of us, the goal should be to own it. Our kids have to own this. It just won't work for us to be prison wardens while they're under our roof and then they go off. They have to own it. They have to buy in. They have to believe it. One of my proudest parenting moments, we dropped our oldest child off at school and he ran off and then he came back and he said, you guys didn't put the parent controls on my new computer. Can you add them? And please, Dad, you keep the password. And I was like, oh, that's so amazing. But there's something there. I mean, I have them on my phone and my devices. Like, we should all have that. We have to be in it together. They have to own it if we want them to be warriors. And it is possible. We can do this. And we can beat these governments and companies that are trying to invade us. And we got this. So I think, especially here today, brainstorming with each other about good techniques to achieve that is the way to go. And thank you so much for sitting so long.